Hi, it's Mo. It is April 3rd and it's time to do my March wrap-up. This is the first wrap-up that I've done since starting my weekly update series where I am updating you every week on what I'm doing in my life, but also what I'm reading. And that was a way to make these wrap-up videos shorter because my vlog-style monthly reading wrap-ups where I would read books and then take clips after I've read them were getting so long. And that's mostly because I read a lot of books every month, possibly too many. Many people would say an obscene amount. In March, I read 18 books, so we're going to try and do this fairly quickly. We're going to go in chronological order, but because this is the first time that I'm doing this new wrap-up style, I haven't done a wrap-up like this in so many years. I've been doing my vlog style wrap-ups for many years while I've been on BookTube, and I did love that, but again, they were just getting too long. Since this is the first one like this, I'm not sure if we'll stick with this format or if this format will stay the way it is. Let me know if you have any suggestions for sure, but what we're going to try to do is talk briefly about each book. The first book that I finished in March was On the Rooftop by Margaret Wilkenson Sexton. This is a literary fiction about a family of women living in California. It's a mom and her 3 daughters, and she moved from the South, early mid-century, 30s, 40s, 50s. The mom's dream in life, Vivian, is to have her daughters be a girl group. So her 3 daughters all sing and perform, and they put on shows. They act in local clubs. They're in an area of California which is very much a Black enclave, so they're able to be minor celebrities in their area. But what Vivian would like most for her daughters is to be major celebrities and to go on to fame and fortune and have meaningful and wonderful lives. But the kind of meaningful life she wants for them and not necessarily what they want. And then we also hear from the perspective of Ruth, Esther, and Chloe, the 3 daughters, and we see what they want for their lives and whether this aligns with what their mother wants or not. I thought overall this was a really interesting book. It talks about a time in Californian history which is really interesting, and I liked that there was a work, celebrity, fame, singer aspect to this which was interesting but not overpowering for the overall story. I liked that this was a book where nothing truly terrible happens. I mean, there are trigger warnings for various things, but there's no on-page horrible things that are happening. There is obviously like racism and there's a little bit of grooming and some other stuff, but I have come to expect so much that the books that I read, especially about Black life in America, are going to be horrible, are going to have horrors in them, and this really didn't read that way, which was nice. And it really is just a kind of intergenerational story of this family, all their hopes and dreams, and how they can help each other or they can harm each other, or etc., but in kind of an overall nice way. It's not the kind of book that I usually read, and I did enjoy it. I would pick up something else from this author, but if you're a reader who likes more like women's fiction or, I don't know, I guess historic fiction for women, I would definitely highly recommend this. It was like a Reese's pick, you know, it's that kind of book, which is not the kind of book that I normally read, but I did like it. The next book that I finished in March is The Hangman. This is 6.5 in the Inspector Gamache series by Louise. This series follows Inspector Gamache, who works out of, now I can't remember, somewhere, Quebec in Canada, and most of his cases revolve around fictional murder village 3 Pines, which is an idyllic little murder village where everyone has a story and everyone gets involved and there's always something afoot and always murders going on and happening. The Hangman was written as like a way to get you into reading. It's very short. It's a little tiny novella, and it definitely condenses down the idea of 3 Pines and all the characters into this teeny tiny little novel. And as you may have guessed, Inspector Gamache is sent out to 3 Pines to investigate a man found hanging from a tree. And that's all you really need to know about this. I think it was a fairly obvious mystery, especially if you read mysteries like this, but I think that was intentional because these books really are designed to help you get back into reading, or designed to be easy reads for people who are just getting used to reading again, or just getting used to reading in the first place. So there's nothing like super crazy horrific in this. I mean, obviously there is death and There's a little bit of gore, but not like crazy. And there is other tropes and things in murder mysteries that you will see, but I liked it. I read this because this was a series that I was thinking of stopping, but I have 2 books on my physical TBR, and since it's March Mystery Madness in March, I wanted to read it and see if it was something that I was going to want to continue, and this definitely made me want to continue on with the series. The next book that I finished in March was The Goshawk by T.H. White. This is my NYRB book for the month. Every month in 2026, I'm trying to read an NYRB book and a graphic novel. So you'll see a graphic novel coming up in a little bit. This is a nonfiction book about author T.H. White's time trying to train a goshawk. We'll call it falconry. It's actually called something else when it's a goshawk. I don't even remember. He's learning falconry and he's writing this journal, and here he is with Goss, his goshawk. You know, he's talking about life. He's talking about his writing routines and his writing life at the time. He's mostly talking about falconry though, and he's mostly talking about goshawks, and he's mostly talking about how to train birds, and it was really super interesting and I really liked it. I read this one on audio and it was narrated by Simon Vance, who's amazing. We all love Simon Vance, right? So it definitely was added to by his narration, and I would recommend it if you're interested in nonfiction about animal companions. It's definitely reset in my mind my dog Tulip, which was another NYRB book similar to this, a nonfiction about a man and his dog Tulip, which was kind of gross and annoying, whereas this one was quite good. There is obviously some animal violence in this because goshawks eat animals, and there's some other animal death and things like that, so just be warned that that does exist. This was written in 1951, so there's also some language and some ideas mentioned that might not be up to modern snuff, but overall I really enjoyed it. I love NYRB. It's worth reading them whether you really like them or not, so I'm glad to be doing this project this year. The next book that I finished in March is The Grownup by Gillian Flynn. This is the first Gillian Flynn that I've ever read, and this story follows our main character, who I believe is unnamed, who is a grifter and a confidence trickster. Currently she's working as like an aura reader in a tarot card mystic astrologer's storefront where there's also sex work done in the back, and she's done that as well. And it talks about her life and how she became who she is. And one of the women that she reads her aura really intrigues our main character, and our main character thinks that she can probably do a further bigger grift by going and cleansing this woman's house. And the story goes from there. You really don't need to know more than that because, again, it is extremely short. I think this is just a short story. It is Edgar winning. I don't think it was written like The Hangman as an easy read, but I would definitely think it qualifies for that. So if you're interested in getting into mystery thrillers, you could definitely give it a shot. But I think it was fairly obvious. I didn't love the writing. I don't think Gillian Flynn's for me. I didn't think she would be. Just like I don't think like AJ Finn or any of those other similar early aughts books are going to be for me. So I will skip more of her books, but if you haven't read any, this is a good place to start. And I thought that was the perfect way for me to get a chance to see if I liked her writing or not, which I don't. Interesting concept though. The next book that I finished in March is Made in Korea, #1. This is by Jeremy Holt, George Skall, and Adam Wollitt. And this is a story set in a future time where people cannot have children anymore, it seems. You're kind of dropped into the middle of this graphic novel, and we first meet a worker in looks like, you know, a computer lab or something, and we kind of find out that he's working on something that he should not be working on. The first part's in Korea, and then we jump to Texas where we see two of our main characters, a family who are going to meet the proxy, which is what like the childlike androids are called that you get when you can't have children, for the first time. And they start to wonder if maybe they want a proxy too. And then we cut back to Korea and we find out that our man is downloading something into one of these proxies. He sends it to our family, and then the story ensues from there. Obviously this proxy, which is kind of like the hope and dream of this couple who can't have kids, turns out to be different than they expected. It turns out to be different than other proxies are because of the circumstances under which they got her. We see this proxy learning and growing and coming into their own, and how a sentient AI android being could develop its own being, and as that being develops, various things start happening. They come into bad influences under people in the school that they go to. The engineer from the beginning who programmed this proxy comes back into the picture thinking that he can take care of the proxy, and by the end we see this proxy in a whole new light. So I did really enjoy this. I thought it was really interesting. I picked this graphic novel up on a whim because it was at a library book sale or something, and I would definitely read more in this series. I didn't expect this story to be very queer, which is great. Written by an author of color, which is awesome. I don't know like where I would find this though, so it's not a top priority, but I'm glad that I read it. I thought it was interesting. It ends on kind of a cliffhanger. I would like to know more. Whose sexy leg is that? What are you doing in here, Marty? What? Why are you sad? Oh no, now your dad's in here too. Oh, he's coming right up to you. Don't fight, you two. Why are you fighting? The next book that I finished in March is A Fatal Grace by Louise Penny. So after reading The Hangman, I decided that I did want to continue on with this series, and this is the second in the Inspector Gamache series. This book is the inspector called in to another murder in Three Pines. Now, he's only visited once in this book, so he does recognize all the people, and he does have to question them again about this murder, and it is about a woman who is new to the town and who nobody really likes, and she lives in like the big house, which happens to be one of the houses that was involved in the first book and involved in the murder in the first book. So we see him kind of revisiting this place with a new life and meeting this woman's family and hearing about this woman from the townspeople who nobody really liked and who did not ingratiate herself with her new neighbors. So we get to learn even more about the town and about the people and about Inspector Gamache's life and his co-workers on the force and his status on the force. There is like a murder in each book that's solved in each book, but then there's longer overarching stories as well. And I really liked it. I did myself a disservice though because I did watch the TV show with Alfred Molina, which is fine. It's a good TV show. I think they made some really positive changes on certain aspects, but it spoiled me for this book. So I knew what was going to happen, and I knew who the culprit was, and I knew the whole thing going into it, which made the mystery a little lackluster for me. But what I did enjoy was, because it's been so long since I read the first in the series, I got to kind of piece together what the mystery in the first series was again, and to reconnect with all the characters. And definitely the strong part of these books are the townsfolk, are Gamache's reaction to them and relationship with them, this kind of found family that emerges, but also at every turn could some people be murdering other people. So very fun series, and I will continue. I don't think I need to keep the physical copies of these though, because I've read them all on audio. Well, no, I read the first one physically. Maybe I'll keep the physical copy of the first one and then get rid of all the other ones, because I think I'll just read these on audio rather than picking up the physical copies from now on. If you like cozy murder town mysteries, definitely check these out. I also read The Shape of Water by Andrea Camarelli for March Mystery Madness. I've had this one on my shelf for a long time. This book was written in the 90s, which I didn't realize going into it, and it follows Inspector Montalbano, who is a detective in a corrupt town in Italy. This is written in a little bit of a noir style, so it kind of jumps around. It's a little bit clipped. There's a lot of dialogue. This was only like a 5 or 6 hour audiobook, so it went by really quickly. I didn't love the first part of this book where we are kind of learning about the town, learning about the corruption. A dead body is found by some sanitation workers, and we know that since every level of this town is corrupt, from the police to the sanitation to the government to various other things, they take a little time to let the police know about the body. And there were aspects of this, the way that Montalbano is kind of a womanizer and every woman loves him and falls in love with him, of course, that reminded me of other novels that I've read and not really liked. But by the end, I was really hooked. So I did end up enjoying this. First of all, I didn't realize it was written in the 90s. So the language and the attitude and the tropes all seemed old and outdated, because they are old and outdated. So once I realized that, I had a much better time with it. And then I also did like Montalbano's character, and I did like that this was kind of told in noir style. I do love noir. So I will continue on with this series, but this is another one that I would rather just read on audio and not keep physically. What I loved about this series was that it was set set in Italy. It is a translated work. This book was translated by Stephen Sartorelli, and it fit all of the prompts for this year's March Mystery Madness. So the prompts were to read a book set in a different continent than you live in, a book by an author from a different country than you are, and to read a translated work. So this hit all of them. I would definitely recommend this one, but know that it's a little dated. The next book was totally unexpected. I read Sin by the poet Ai. This is a totally random book that I picked up at a used book sale a while ago, and I didn't know anything about this author. She is a Japanese Native American Black American author, and I love these poems. They were really interesting. They reminded me a lot of my favorite poetry collection that I read last year, which is The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart by Gabriella Cavalcalresi, I think her name is, in that these poems are very much stories and they're kind of horror adjacent. Like, they definitely give you a little bit of a horror vibe, much more in that other collection that I mentioned, but in this one it's a little bit maybe more intentional, which makes it less horrific because she does interweave mythology and different kinds of stories into her poetry, and they're even labeled as stories sometimes. So two brothers of fiction. But there's also obviously some autofiction in here and some touching on real life, of course, and this does have a lot to do with real life as well. But it was just a really, really interesting collection, and I'm so excited to read more by this author. This was written in 1986. If you like poetry, and if you like poetry that breaks down those walls of what poetry is, I think this is a great one. The next book that I finished in March was Searching for Seraphim, The Life and Legacy of Seraphim Joe Fortes, written by Ruby Smith Diaz, and I read this book on audio. It was a bonus borrow with Hoopla, so I just wanted to grab it while I had the opportunity and read it, and this is a nonfiction book about Seraphim Joe Fortes, who was a Black, Caribbean, English, Canadian lifeguard. He was originally from Trinidad. He left Trinidad at an early age in his teens and sailed to England. He became a sailor, and he sailed around on various ships and called England home for a while until one of the ships that he was sailing on got to Toronto, the Toronto area of Canada, and stopped there. And then he lived there for the rest of his life. And one of the things that sailing taught him and living in islands taught him was to be a waterman. So he quickly became one of the only people who knew how to swim and how to lifeguard, and he worked on a beach that had both men and women, which was unusual, and both white and black people as well as other races allowed on this beach at different times. Obviously there was still quite a bit of segregation, a lot of racism, especially against Black, Indigenous, and Asian people at the time, and he even perpetuated some of this racism even though he faced racism himself. But he also rose to a status and a level of like hero and of work that no other Black man had ever achieved at this time. So it was a really interesting book about his life, and I liked the audiobook. There's a lot of pictures and a lot of text that are footnotes that you are read to by the narrator. You are read about the pictures that appear in the book, which is interesting. It probably would have been better to have a physical copy of this to reference, but overall I thought it was like really interesting if you're looking for Black history about Canada or about a subject being a lifeguard that you don't normally see, or if you're looking for stories about people who are displaced from their homes and make homes somewhere else. I think this is a really good book. Overall, I thought it was super interesting and I was super glad to have read it. I do think that it originally started out as like a school project or like a project rather than a book, and I do think that that showed. There was a lot of notes, a lot of citations, a lot of footnotes that felt very academic and not necessarily like super well revered academic, but more like, here's a paper I'm turning in. I don't think that's bad necessarily, but I'm interested to see what Ruby Diaz does next. The next book that I finished in March is I Need You to Read This by Jessa Maxwell. I read The Golden Spoon by Jessa Maxwell a few years ago, and I swore I was not going to read any more books because the Golden Spoon was bad. It had an interesting idea, but it wasn't super well written. It was pretty obvious and it wasn't very exciting. exciting, but it was Jessa Maxwell's debut, and when I saw this one, I love this cover, by the way. This might make it to my best covers of the year. I decided to pick it up and give her another shot. I Need You to Read This follows Alex, who has moved to New York, and she is making a life for herself, but it's a very solitary, weird life. She like works from home. She's been there for years, but she's only just started becoming a regular at the cafe that she goes to every day. She keeps mostly to herself. We know right off the bat that there's something in her past that she doesn't want to deal with, but something that she loves to do and something that's consistent in her life is read the Dear Constance letters in the local newspaper. So when the author of the Dear Constance letters, an older lady, is killed, they start looking for a new Dear Constance, and kind of out of just a weird sense of like grief and disbelief, our main character Alex decides to apply and she gets the job. But when she gets the job and when she goes to these offices, she definitely finds more than she's bargained for. Like, she has to interact with people which she hasn't interacted with before. She's definitely got to put herself out there in a way that she has been avoiding for a very long time. And then she learns more about the death of the original Dear Constance, and she decides that she needs to investigate. That's really all you need to know. That's the basic premise of this book. It was very, very obvious. There were some things in this that you were like, duh, Alex, like, you've been being careful your whole life and you're not careful about this. But it was just that kind of thriller, you know, like kind of a silly, ridiculous, head empty thriller. And it was fine and it was fun. And there were aspects that I liked and I had a fine time reading it. Will I remember it in years to come? No, probably not. Will I try another Jessa Maxwell? Sure. I'll try another Jessa Maxwell. I think this one was markedly better than the first book in plot, in character development, in writing, so I'll see what she does next. And if you're looking for just a very silly, fun, fast-paced thriller, then definitely check this out. But check trigger warnings because there is abuse and grooming, there is gaslighting and murder, of course, and a bunch of other things you might want to know about before you start reading. The next book that I finished in March was Lucky Day by Chuck Tingle. This is the first Chuck Tingle that I read, and I really, really enjoyed this one. This is an arc that I got in a little free library near me. This follows Vera. She's about to come out to her mom. She's about to move on with her life with her fiance. She's about to get a book published when the low probability event happens all over the world. A horrible, crazy catastrophe that no one saw coming. It changes the course of Vera's life, and we meet up again with her years later when she has an opportunity to figure out what really happened on that horrific day that totally torpedoed her life. She meets up with someone who is also investigating in a more official capacity this event, and together they try to figure it out. This is a horror. There's definitely body horror. There's definitely gruesome parts. There's definitely blood and guts and gore in this, but it's not as horrific as I thought it was going to be. It's not as over the top as I thought it was going to be. It was as queer as I thought it was going to be, which is nice. But overall, I just really enjoyed it. Like, I thought it was a super fun, fast-paced, easy to read book. Did I read this one on audio? I honestly can't remember. That's how you know that audiobooks are the same as reading, listening to audiobooks, because a lot of the times I cannot remember if I read a book physically or if I read it on audio. Some books I would swear I read them on audio, but I read them physically. And some books I would say, oh yeah, I read that one physically, but I didn't. So I'm pretty sure I did read this one audio, and I enjoyed it. If you like wacky stories, this is definitely a good one, but remember that it wasn't as wacky as I thought it was going to be. The next book that I finished in March was Once Poems by Alice Walker. I love Alice Walker, and she's definitely fast becoming one of my favorite authors. I always have to say and clarify that I do not agree with her view on trans folks, and I find it very unfortunate that she is a queer woman who is anti-trans. That's really unfortunate. This collection of poems was written in 1968. It is her first collection of poetry, and it is the first collection that I've read from her, and I really, really enjoyed it. There's a poem early on in here where she is visiting Africa, which I thought was really interesting. It reminded me of Out of Africa by Isak Dinesen. There's poetry about Black life in America. There's poetry about her love life. There's poetry about interracial relationships. There's poetry about what's going on in the world and the state of the world at this time in 1968, which is still relevant to today. And I really, really enjoyed this collection of poetry, and I can't wait to read more Alice Walker in general, but I definitely hope I find some more of her poetry soon. If you want to read more Black American women authors, go into this knowing her politics, but I definitely recommend Alice Walker. The next book that I finished in March was Wandering Souls by Cecile Pinn. This was kind of an unexpected read for me. I've been wanting to read this one for a while, and I didn't realize that the audio was so short. It was only like 5 or 6 hours, and I picked it up and I read it all in one day, and I really, really enjoyed this book. It was longlisted, I think, for the Women's Prize. It follows siblings, 3 siblings, a girl and 2 boys, who at the very beginning of this book are in 1970s Vietnam. Just after the Vietnam War, their family is packing them up to be the first leg of the journey of them escaping Vietnam and seeking refugee status in another country. The main character and her 2 brothers are tucked into a boat. They have to go on this terrible, harrowing, very dangerous journey to Hong Kong, and they are going alone because the rest of their family is going to follow afterwards. So we follow our 3 siblings on their journey to Hong Kong that later takes them to England, that talks about America, that talks about their lives and how this journey impacted their lives. I feel like you don't need to know a lot more than that. The book is told from the oldest daughter's perspective and how she kind of has to take on a parenting role throughout this journey. Their chapters have the date and the location. And then there's other kind of, not chapters, but there's little inserts where you're also finding out about like other refugees and other stories interwoven in there. And then we do also have another perspective in here. I don't think you need to know all that stuff going into it, because I think that this book was a little bit spoiled for me. I kind of knew some things that maybe would have been a little bit more shocking, would have been a little bit more tugging at my heartstrings had I not known them. I read this book on audio. I do think reading it on audio, it was a little bit hard to parse out what the chapters were, who, because 2 of the chapters we get titles for, but the other one we don't, which was a little confusing reading it on audio. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I thought the writing was fantastic. It was very, very simple, very, very easy to read. Although there is horrific things in this, and although really terrible things happen, it wasn't like overly gory or gruesome or gross, and it definitely wasn't done in an exploitative manner. So I really like this one, and I definitely looking forward to reading more Cecile Pinn. If you like family stories, if you like intergenerational stories, kind of, if you like following people for the majority of their life and their family dynamic, I would definitely pick this one up. Or if you want to learn more about the experience of the Vietnamese after the Vietnamese War, this has got glimpses of that as well. The next book that I finished in March was Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is the 5th Toni Morrison book in publication order. I'm reading Toni Morrison in publication order, and I have read The Bluest Eye, Sula, Song of Solomon, Tar Baby, and Beloved. The reason that I was reading these books in order, in publication order, was because I was intimidated about Beloved, and I did find it very intimidating, and it took me a long time to read, and I read it over very many weeks, but I absolutely loved it. I mean, all of Toni Morrison's books are really hard to read. This book revolves around Setha, who is an escaped slave. She escapes from her slave owner in the South and goes to Ohio, where her mother-in-law is waiting. Her mother-in-law was freed by Setha's husband, her son, and moved to Cincinnati. So we follow Setha on her journey to reunite with her mother-in-law and with the children that she sent ahead of her to her mother-in-law's house. Similar to Wandering Souls, Setha sends her children ahead of her older children, and she escapes just with the baby in utero. But when we meet back up with Setha years later, when her in utero baby has been born and is an adult, it's just her and Setha. Her mother-in-law has passed away, and many, many other things have happened in the intervening time. So we see Setha during the current day and then get flashbacks from various characters about the past, and we find out all the different things that Setha went through, escaping slavery, within slavery, before, she was an adult, when she was a child, and afterwards what's happened to her since moving to Cincinnati. And it's just like a really amazing book, of course. Like, it's a classic for a reason. Toni Morrison is incredible, her writing is incredible, and the story is very much about reconciling with the past, moving on or not, and how that affects you if you can't move on from the past. Every single one of the characters in this has to try and move on from a horrible past, has to try to move on from trauma, and how can they do it? And can they do it together, or do you have to be isolated to be able to do that? So it was fantastic, absolutely amazing, absolutely great. I read this one physically, but There's more to this story, and I will talk about it in just a minute. The next book that I finished in March is No One Left to Come Looking for You by Sam Lipsky. This is a pretty short novella, noir-ish, about a young man who moves from New Jersey to the East Village in Manhattan to become a punk musician. He is a punk musician, but he wants to have that be his whole life and have that be his whole world. He's living at the perfect time because it's 1993 in the East Village in Manhattan. He wakes up one morning to find out that his bandmate and friend has stolen his bass guitar to buy heroin. So the story is really him looking for his friend, trying to find his friend, and trying to get his bass guitar back. It's kind of framed as like almost like a 90s movie, almost like an 80s movie, where our main character Jonathan, now called Jack, is looking for his bass because the band that he's desperately trying to hold together has like a big gig coming up. So he needs to get his bass back so he can play. And he needs to get his bandmates back together so that they can play. But then more violence does occur, and it ends up being a little bit of a murder mystery and a little bit of a mystery, and it was overall really fun, and I really did enjoy it. It's very noir, it's very 90s, it's very nostalgic for me because of New York and because of the time period. So keep that in mind. Like, if you didn't live in New York in this time, which I lived in New York just a little bit after this time, maybe it wouldn't hit as hard for you, but maybe if you did live through the 90s, it would hit very hard. If you like punk rock, I think it would definitely hit hard, and if you have that feeling of being an adult and trying to navigate adult things, but still being a kid in a lot of ways too, you might like it as well. I've never seen another Sam Lipsky book. I guess I would read one, but I don't know what they are. The next book that I finished in March is Sherlock Holmes and the Case of Sabina Hall by L.B. Greenwood. This is a unsanctioned Sherlock Holmes tale by someone who, writing in the 80s and 90s, told a lot of Sherlock Holmes tales. This was before, I think, Sherlock Holmes is like, whatever it's called, legacy, or, you know, whoever holds Sherlock Holmes's intellectual property, like, let people do it, the Arthur Conan Doyle estate. So I think people just wrote stories because he was in the common domain. And this follows Watson and Sherlock on an early case that Watson had previously not written down, but he feels like needs to be told, going to Sabina Hall. Sherlock Holmes is asked by an old schoolmate to see if he knows a doctor who could go to Sabina Hall because the old schoolmate's uncle is ailing. Watson decides to go. Sherlock accompanies him, and they try to solve some mysteries in Sabina Hall. It was very fun. It was fast-paced. It was easy to read. I think L.B. Greenwood, who is known to me as a person who wrote a lot of Sherlock Holmes stories and edited a lot of Sherlock Holmes anthologies, does a good job of talking like Sherlock Holmes, of writing like Arthur Conan Doyle, but still putting in some like more relevant topics, I guess. I've seen it done better, but I've seen it done worse. So I did enjoy this book, and I would read more from this author. I didn't get to read any Holmes for the holiday in February, so I was glad to read a Holmes like close to February. The next book that I finished in March was Beloved. So immediately upon finishing my physical read, I picked up the audiobook. I had it on hold from Libby, and it took a very long time to come in. It came in like when I was a quarter from the end of the book, and I thought about reading it, but I decided that I wanted to finish it physically. But I'm so glad I picked up the audiobook because it's read by Toni Morrison, and oh God, her voice is just so amazing, and the stories are just so amazing, and her writing is just so beautiful and incredible that it was really nice to hear her read it. And even though this is still, upon reread several days after the first, an incredibly hard novel to read, an incredibly difficult novel, it was so good to read it. So now I want to reread all of Toni Morrison's work as read by the author, and I want to read all the ones that I have moving forward read by the author as well, but I think I'll try to read the physical copies first and then read the audiobook. I could see, if I could find a book by Toni Morrison that wasn't as horrific and didn't have as much actual real life horrors in it, I could see her books becoming like comfort rereads for me that I listen to on audio constantly, the way that I do The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But I was absolutely thrilled to reread this. And again, there's just so much complex things about Beloved, and so many themes that you could identify, and so many avenues that you could talk about within this story. Like, I can't really say anything that hasn't been said before, right? But what I would say is you need to read it. It is required reading. And also what I would say is don't be as intimidated as I was, even though this is incredibly difficult. And if this is the first book of its ilk that you've read, it might be super, super hard to get through. But the way that Toni Morrison writes is so completely enchanting and captivating and compelling that her books are not as intimidating as I think they're going to be. The last book that I read in March was Dead by Morning by Dorothy Simpson. This is part of the Luke Thanet series, and Luke Thanet is a British detective working out of Surrington, and he goes to all sorts of little cozy villages where people are murdering people all the time. And this one is no different. He is called out in the middle of winter to find a body in a snowdrift that has seemingly just been hit by a car, and because it was snowing so heavily, people think this is an accident, but by the way the body is cast aside from the road, Thanet kind of thinks that this probably is murder, and so he and his sergeant start investigating. And just like all Luke Thanet, there's a lot of people in this town who like this character, who didn't like this character. There are likable people in this town, there are unlikable people, but everyone is like connected to the case, and Luke has to go and interview all these different people and try to figure out what actually happened. Unlike most Thanet books, almost every witness he talks to is hostile, which makes this book really fun and interesting to read. And then, definitely like all Luke Thanet books, we also talk about Luke Thanet's wife and his family and his kids, and we see where they are in their lives at this time. This is number 9 in the series, I believe, and I've been reading them kind of out of order, so I haven't read 1 through 9, but I've read quite a few of the ones in there. We also see Sergeant Lyman's family and where he's at. So there's this really interesting mix and juxtaposition of Thanet's home life and his work life and how he tries to balance those out, and then like murder and mayhem on the one side and like trying to keep himself sane and his family sane on the other. And I really love these stories. They all follow the exact same trajectory where like you find out about the murder and you have to interview a bunch of people. Lyman and Thanet toss around ideas together. They go to the pub, they work on the case, and then Thanet solves it, usually partly because of something Lyman said. He doesn't tell you how he solved it, but he goes and he solves the case and he confronts the murderer and they confess. And then at the end, he like deconstructs what he found out and what he figured out, either with Lyman or more likely with his wife. So they all follow that exact same trajectory, which is fine. That's fun. That's part of what makes a cozy mystery cozy, I think. And in these books, a lot of times the murder is because of the same social taboo, because of this particular social thing that sometimes happens that people do not like and will be willing to kill about. And this one had that, so it was a little bit obvious. These are not mysteries that you can solve yourself, but you still kind of have an idea what's going to happen. I really like reading these. It was totally fun to read for March Mystery Madness, and those were all the books that I read in March. This was a little bit all over the place. I tried to really hurry it up. I still think it's going to be quite long, but I had a great reading month and it was so fun. And if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts on any of these books, you can go to all my weekly updates. I will leave all the ones for March in the description down below, and you can hear more about these books as well as what was going on in my life. So let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here. Let me know what you thought of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!